Hello and welcome to the author reading. My name is Gerhard Paul Hopper, and I will be reading from my latest book, What My Dog Taught Me About Jesus, Faith for Everyday Life. For your information, what has happened so far. A few years ago, I took in a stray dog from a rescue center and named her Socke. A wonderful friendship developed between her and me. And now to Chapter 2. It is titled, Ask and Receive. Have you ever had any key experiences? These are life-changing events that turn your emotional patterns upside down. Figuratively speaking, they can pull the emotional ground out from under your feet. One such event was the beginning of a series of experiences with Socke that changed my view of my little companion and often made me think. It came as a surprise and without warning, just as many stories with God in everyday life began. Socke had been with me for a good 5 years, and we had settled in wonderfully. As I mentioned, we had our rituals. These are helpful for both humans and animals and contribute significantly to a harmonious everyday life. But they can also have a serious and well-considered background. I know I'm laying it on thick here when I even bring ethics into play in the following. Have you also read the German author Karl May, or just seen the reruns of the Winnetou films? If you only know him from the cinema and television, you're probably much younger than me. In my childhood and early youth, shirts were still tucked into trousers. Television was only available in black and white in 4:3 format. And Karl May was, in a sense, required reading. I was a bookworm and devoured his novels. Even though I think I have read all of his books, I am, of course, talking about Winnetou, chief of the Apaches, Old Shatterhand, and the Wild West. Suspense and action were always at the forefront, of course, but even as a child, I was fascinated by the characters who, at least in the books, were described in an understandable and detailed way in terms of their behavior and character. They impressed me, and many of the good guys seemed like role models to me. Without realizing it, I absorbed the ethics of these stories. After all, Old Shatterhand came out as a Christian and even taught his blood brother how to pray. Even back then, I found one Native American ritual so remarkable that it has remained in my memory to this day. When the camp was set up in the evening during a journey, the horses were taken care of first before the people sat down around the campfire and grilled their buffalo steaks. It was considered an irrefutable law, first the horse, then the human. I did the same with my dog. At lunchtime, I would first fill Socke's food bowl and then sit down at the table myself. It happened on a normal weekday at my company. I was alone, preparing my lunch in the cozy kitchen. I don't remember what it was, but it was one of those delicious meals that my wife, who is a great cook, had prepared over the weekend and frozen for me. I sat at the table, the food was thawed and hot, I said a quick prayer, and I enjoyed my meal. Then it happened. Socke sat down next to the table so that she had eye contact with me, looked at me, and started whimpering. She had laid her floppy ears back, which meant she was stressed. Did you know that dogs can have dozens of different facial expressions? And Socke's facial expressions told me that she was desperate. But there was also something questioning in her eyes. Was something wrong? I just realized that she wanted something from me. And suddenly it dawned on me. I had forgotten her food bowl, and the poor animal was very hungry. It's hard for me to describe what went through my mind in a fraction of a second. Sitting in front of me was this small and highly emotional creature who turned to me in her distress. How could Socke understand the situation. She was used to me taking care of her, especially at lunchtime, when she was always particularly hungry. She had experienced this every day, and I had never disappointed her with my reliability. And now she was supposed to get nothing? It was precisely this point that caused me pain. I loved this thoroughly friendly, good-natured animal, and the realization that I might have permanently damaged the relationship of trust we had built up over many years made me feel guilty and hurt. At that moment, I realized something I had never thought about before. As a dog owner, it was up to me whether my animal could live and stay healthy. If I gave him something to eat, he could live. If I denied him water, he would die of thirst. Socke lived with me in a golden cage, and I held her life in my hands. What's more, I had wanted it that way. At that very moment, my view of my dog changed. Suddenly, Socke was no longer an animal that took orders, but a gifted creature who could communicate with me in an obviously painful situation. Full of trust, she now sought my help. It broke my heart. No, please don't think this is all exaggerated. This wasn't just about an empty food bowl. It was about a friendly and emotional relationship between animal and human. Didn't my dog have an ethical right to food? Hadn't I promised to take care of her? And this is precisely the core of what Socke's behavior triggered in me. Socke trusted me, she believed in me, and that moved me. I am an imperfect human being, and if I can feel so deeply toward an animal in my imperfection, how will God, who is perfect, respond to the prayers of us humans? I quote, "And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him." My encounter with Socke stayed with me in the days that followed. The parallel that had opened up to me preoccupied me. What about my trust in the God who gave us a gospel full of promises? Hadn't he promised to take care of me? The Apostle Peter writes, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." And Jesus teaches us, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? God has your life and mine in his hands. He wanted both of us. And here's the good news. God has taken responsibility for you. He keeps his promises and is ready to take care of all your needs. But if Socke hadn't made herself heard with her squeaking, her food bowl would have remained empty. It is similar with us Christians. If we do not turn to our provider through prayer and faith, we are left to our own devices and our food bowl remains empty. Faith is not a sure thing, but must be learned. Jesus is waiting for you to turn to him with complete trust, whether you bring him the big problems of life or the small concerns of everyday life. Jesus said of himself that people would recognize the Father in him. His ministry here on earth was thoroughly characterized by his merciful intervention in the desperate situations of those who trusted him. And mercy is more than just empathy. Mercy compels and leads to action. When I saw Socke's despair, I was deeply moved. For her, the need seemed great. But for me, it was a small gesture, and her food bowl was filled. Incidentally, I gave her an extra portion as compensation. Can you imagine that even the greatest hardship you may be experiencing right now would not cause God any great difficulty? You don't need to have great faith, just a little trust in a great God. After around 40 years, I can no longer count the number of times I have asked Jesus to intervene. However, I cannot claim that everything has always run smoothly in my life of faith. In the early years, faith, fear, and doubt were constantly vying for attention. Fear is also a kind of faith, but in its negative form, and that is why it can be dangerous. And so I often had to deal with overcoming fears and processing doubts. Why? God rarely adhered to my ideas about timing when it came to his intervention, but instead, as I saw it, made me wait unnecessarily. And the waiting bred doubt, which led to many questions. Had God even heard my prayer, or had it gotten stuck on the ceiling? Was my request inappropriate? Were there obstacles in my life, such as sin? Believe me, there were situations where my thoughts continued to race even in my sleep. But looking back, I realized again and again that he not only acted with extreme punctuality, but also trained my faith. No, Jesus never let me down. I can still remember one of my first training sessions very well. I spent the first years of my life of faith in an established church community where the theological spectrum ranged from liberal to strictly orthodox, covering pretty much everything that was common at the time. There were many questions, but the prevailing doctrine did not provide any answers. But remember, I was looking for the adventure of faith. I could express my basic conviction very simply. If faith in God did not have a noticeable effect on my everyday life, it would be unnecessary and less valuable than an ideology. How does a new Christian learn to pray? By listening to the old hands. And that's what I did. Even though it took me quite a while to say anything myself in a prayer group for the first time, I was eventually able to join in with the usual style of prayer. Lord, bless all the sick and heal them. Let the renovation work be successful tomorrow, and next weekend we have a church festival. Give us good weather, and if it rains, we will celebrate in the parish hall. No, I am not writing this with satirical intent, nor do I mean these examples as a funny anecdote. That's how it was, with complete sincerity. And I don't question that. I am simply describing my own personal development here. Praying for this, that, and the other was not always exciting, but it was certainly a very important practice in this church. But there was a gap. No one had told me that I could bring my own needs before God in prayer. And I can't tell you why I didn't come up with the idea myself. Perhaps it was because my family and I were not suffering any material hardship. At some point, I discovered an audio cassette course. Note to younger readers, this is something like a precursor to audiobooks, in which an English pastor explained the practical life of a Christian. His name was Colin Urquhart, with whom I would have a lot to do with a few years later. With the Bible in his hand, he unfolded the promises of the gospel in such an encouraging way that I had never heard before. One of the first chapters dealt with God's will to provide for us in all areas of our lives, that is, in our finances, relationships, health, career, etc. I listened intently and it made me curious. Shortly afterwards, I had the opportunity to put what I had heard into practice. I live with my family in a rural area. There is no bakery, butcher, or supermarket in our village, and my wife was dependent on her own car. But it was so old and rusty that I eventually became ashamed of it. In addition, the state inspection was about to expire. A replacement was needed. And since my wife and I lived according to the classic division of roles, she was the fantastic cook and successful full-time family manager, and I earned the money and took care of technology and the car. So it was up to me to find a new vehicle. So I studied the car markets in the newspapers, visited relevant car dealers, and quickly became frustrated with the prices of used vehicles. The upcoming state inspection date was looming ever larger. It was a Thursday morning. I'd already gotten into the habit of preparing for the day in my study with prayer and a short Bible reading before leaving the house. I didn't know what to do about the car. I was uncertain and asked God if I could bring this concern to him. Of course, no voice came from heaven encouraging or urging me to do so, but in those moments I realized that I was not asking for a luxury item, but for an unavoidable necessity. So I presented my entire plan to God. I was looking for a used car, about 5 years old with about 60,000 kilometers on the odometer, reliable, 4 doors because of the child seats, and I was willing to spend 4,000 Deutschmarks on it. Even for 1985, this budget was not necessarily generous, but my latest bank statement did not seem to allow for more. Then I drove to work. At the time, I held a senior position in a large industrial company. In the afternoon, my assistant came into my office and placed the weekly newspaper on my desk, which was regularly distributed to all mailboxes. She had never done that before, and since I didn't know the paper, I opened it out of curiosity. An extensive car market smiled at me, and then I saw the tiny ad. A small car like the one I was looking for 4,200 Deutschmarks. 3 hours later, the deal was sealed with a handshake. Can you guess? The car was exactly 5 years old, had 4 doors, and 65,000 kilometers on the odometer. For a moment, I was tempted to negotiate with the seller and offer only 3,800, but I thought of my prayer. If I had suggested 4,000 to God, it seemed wise to keep my word. And indeed, my trading partner was happy with the offer and gave me a set of well-preserved winter tires to boot. A few weeks later, a well-known car magazine reported on this model and described it as an insider tip on the used car market. Now, I had learned 2 things. God was more generous and willing to answer my personal prayers than I had imagined. In the following period, I learned to formulate my requests in prayer in a very detailed and concrete way. And when I picked up the car with my wife the next day, and she saw it, she was visibly surprised. So I came to the second realization, namely that when buying the next car, it would probably be better to involve her more carefully in the final decisions, even when it came to cars and technology. Jesus is not an imperfect dog owner, like me. He is God and love personified through and through. There are no limits to his power. On the contrary, everything is possible for him, and he creates paths and open doors for us where we no longer see any. Jesus sacrificed his life on the cross for you and me so that we might have life in abundance. Through him, we have gained access to the Father, and it is said that we can ask him for whatever we want. The key to this is prayerful faith, and prayer is not imposed on us as a compulsory exercise, but is given to us as an almost incomprehensible gift. Every Christian decides for themselves the degree of faith and prayer they want to use in their life. But the Bible shows us God's expectation, namely that we should make use of it day and night for both small and significant things. Have courage. Dare to come before God in prayer with the desires and dreams of your heart. Count on his mercy and his willingness to lovingly fulfill the many promises we read about, especially in the New Testament. I wish you God's grace and peace. Thank you for listening.